expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
And welcome to a special edition of Washington Unplugged. I'm Bob Orr. The crisis in Egypt seems to be escalating at this hour. A coalition of opposition groups now is calling for 1 million people tomorrow to take to the streets of Cairo to pressure President Mubarak to step down. Meanwhile, thousands of foreigners are fleeing Egypt today as countries around the world, including the U.S., are sending in various planes to evacuate their citizens. To talk about the latest developments and where all of this could go, I'm joined today by Chief White House Correspondent Chip Reid. He's at the White House. Our National Security Correspondent David Martin's over at the Pentagon. And here at the desk with me, Robert Danin with the Council on Foreign Relations, and our veteran State Department reporter and producer, Charlie Wolfson, also at the desk. Charlie, let me start with you. This is day 6 or so of the protests. They seem to be getting larger. Now there's a call for 1 million people tomorrow. How much trouble is the Mubarak government in?
Well, the Mubarak government's in a lot of trouble, and it clearly knows that. And it's a very significant situation for the United States. Mr. Mubarak, President Mubarak's been in power for 30-odd years. And, all of a sudden, the people have come to the streets and are staying in the streets, which is key. The police couldn't beat them back. The Army has now entered the picture, and the Army is not taking up strong positions to get the people out off the streets. They're just maintaining order. So I think President Mubarak's in a lot of trouble. It's a significant foreign policy challenge for the Obama administration.
Mr. Danin, who are these protesters? What is their grievance? I mean, I know for a long time they've complained about opposition or oppression from the Mubarak regime. Who are these people? What do they want?
Well, what's striking is that this is a real amalgamation of different people, different elements. This is not one single organized group. This is really a grassroots demonstration that has risen from below. People who have said, enough. We're tired of President Mubarak. We're tired of the repressive regime. We want him to go.
Has the group coalesced in any kind of organized effort, or is it still kind of an organic building protest that's kind of got multi-facets to it?
Well, what we've seen over the last few days is the beginning of a organization forming. Certain groups, the Muslim Brotherhood, have come together with another opposition group to unite behind Mohammed al-Baradei as the face for this revolution or for this challenge to the Mubarak regime. So we are seeing now the nascent organization of a group here with Mohammed al-Baradei as the face of that group.
Charlie, Mohammed al-Baradei, who we're looking at here, is a figure that may be known to many people. Of course, he was in charge of the International Atomic Energy Group. What do we know about him? Is he a potential compromise force here?
Well, he's very interested in probably in trying to run to become president of Egypt, but he's been out of Egypt for a long time. As you say, we know him in an international context as the former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, but he's been away from Egypt, and there's a question of whether he's got a strong enough political base to actually win an election, even if there were a free and fair election. On the other hand, there are not other clear leaders who are large enough, perhaps, to challenge him. So he, in fact, he may come out of this as the next leader of Egypt. I think it's too soon to tell.
I want to talk more about that in just a moment, but I want to bring David Martin in here now. David, what happens in Egypt may depend in part or in large part about how the military reacts. So far, we've seen the tank guys welcome protesters aboard. What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that the U.S. may be getting its money's worth out of all the money it has invested in the Egyptian military over the years, because they really seem to be taking a very professional, and that's the word that the U.S. harps on, a professional view toward this, and are not acting as riot police trying to put down a riot. They've provided added security at the U.S. Embassy to guard against anything happening there. So right now the Pentagon is very satisfied with the way the Egyptian military has been handling itself. On
a military-to-military basis, what kind of message have our folks been sending to their counterparts in Egypt?
Don't overreact. Don't go into the streets to put down these or drive the demonstrators off the streets. And I mean, I think that's what the U.S. military is trying to do itself. It does not want to get involved in an evacuation of Americans there. The things it is doing militarily, it is doing very, very quietly. It sent in some extra Marines overnight to the embassy without saying anything about it. It just doesn't want to be seen as playing a role in this entire affair.
Chip Reid, the administration from the beginning here has struggled to kind of articulate a very, very careful fine line between endorsing democracy on the one hand and supporting an old ally in Mubarak on the other hand. Where is the administration right now?
Well, they're where they've been all along, which is, slowly modulating their position a bit, even more in the direction of the protesters and away from Mubarak, but they certainly don't want to be seen as just dumping him. You don't want the leaders of Saudi Arabia, for example, to think, wow, that could happen to us quite easily. So they are being very careful about it, but clearly their sympathies are with the people out in the streets, and the president has made that very clear. And the word they've started using recently is transition to a new government. They don't explicitly say that's a new government without Mubarak, because they understand it could be a government with Mubarak at the head, but they certainly want some form of new government, a transition to something else other than what is in place now. And certainly the likelihood, they believe here at the White House, is that will be without Mubarak, but he appears to be intent on hanging on.
Mr. Danin, that phrase transition to democracy is that's the headline of the day. What does that mean? What is the administration trying to say there?
Well, I think the administration is trying to say we need to see real change quickly. We've seen Mr. Mubarak change the lineup of his team. That's an important first step. But the real question is, what does he do with it? What steps does he now take that meets the needs of the demonstrators? What kind of transition to democracy will take place? There's going to be an election in the autumn, in November. Will he allow real parties to form? Will he allow real free and fair elections to take place? Will he allow freedom of assembly, organization, allow communications to be restored, real civil society to organize? That's the sort of thing that needs to happen. It needs to happen very fast. The administration does not think he's probably going to do it, so I think they're laying down a marker, identifying what it is they'd like him to do, so that they're then in a position to say, well, we asked, we prodded, we laid down what we expected. If he didn't do it, then, well, he's on his own.
There was a shuffling of the deck chairs over the weekend. He brought in his longtime intel head to be the vice president. The protesters immediately said, well, that's just not enough.
Right.
I mean, is Mubarak just trying to buy time here? What is his hope?
Well, I think bringing in the head of the intelligence, Mr. Omar Suleiman, was not meant to appease the demonstrators. It was meant to appease the army. I think what he's trying to do is shore up his base with the army. The army right now is staying above the fray. They are the last venerated institution in Egypt. People are welcoming them. They're having themselves take pictures with them. Right now, the army hasn't used violence against the people. I wouldn't be surprised if what would have happened was that the army went to Mr. Mubarak behind closed doors and said, listen, you're in big trouble. We need to start preparing the way. And bringing in Mr. Omar Suleiman was a way to try to prepare to throw a sop to the army and have the army prepared to potentially take over if Mr. Mubarak has to step down.
In your opinion, can Mubarak survive this in the short term, or is the end game that he just has to go?
I don't think it's inevitable yet. We have seen a situation like Tiananmen Square, so I wouldn't say it's inevitable, but it doesn't look good.
Charlie, we saw what happened in Tunisia. That seemed to have given some energy to the people in Egypt who a long time had these grievances. Beyond Egypt, though, there are other worries.
There are other worries, of course, and they're all friends of the United States. Saudi Arabia has been mentioned, King Abdullah there, and the family, the Saud family that's been ruling Saudi Arabia. You have Jordan, and King Abdullah there. It's the potential for more states to fall, for more peoples to go into the streets, is very, very worrisome. There are different cases in different places, and not everyone should assume that whatever happened in Tunisia will automatically happen in Egypt, or what happens in Egypt, and we don't know what that'll be, will actually move to Jordan or Saudi Arabia. Lebanon has problems of its own, but it is also got a very unstable new government, but stability there is very fragile. And of course, all of this plays to America's support for Israel. Jordan and Egypt are the only two Arab nations that have peace treaties with Israel. what happens if these regimes fall and if more radical regimes take over. So the Obama administration has to take all this into consideration. In Israel itself, there's great concern about what's going to happen in Egypt and who will succeed Mubarak, if in fact Mubarak leaves, because even though it's been a cold peace, it's been a peace. So I think the Obama administration has to calculate all of these moves and get its policy ready to handle each and every case. And some may be different, but in fact, I guess there is a scenario that says they could all be the same.
Go ahead.
Can I just jump in there?
Sure.
Because I really think that it's true there is a contagion effect that is spreading throughout the region in a way we've never seen before. But I think the countries that are at most risk are not the monarchies, but the absolute dictatorships, the places where the power is centralized around one person. Countries like Libya, countries like Algeria, countries like Sudan. That's where I think the regimes are the most vulnerable today. Countries like Jordan, for example, are in a position to, if the heat gets too high, then the king can just dismiss his government. And what the demonstrators in Jordan are calling for is the removal of Premier Rifai, not the removal of the king. So the more that power is diffused in a country, the more safety nets it has, the more it can throw things overboard while saving the core. The same is the case in Morocco, where the king stands above politics. And so if things get really bad, the Moroccan government could get brought down, but the monarchy stays in place.
David Martin, I guess this is sometimes an example of be careful what you ask for, because, I mean, we're pro-democracy, but we're not sure what could come in behind the Mubarak administration if he does fall.
Well, you look what democracy has wrought in Lebanon, which is instability, and now Hezbollah on the cusp of power. You look at elections in Gaza, and you get Hamas. So there is a definite element here that all of this could work against long-term U.S. interests by putting in power governments that will not be willing to work with the United States. And of course, when you come to Egypt, that's just particularly crucial because, for one thing, the Suez Canal is just vital to so much of what the U.S. Does in the Middle East.
One of the opposition factions is the Muslim Brotherhood, which over time has been kind of a frightening prospect for the U.S. Is there a fear at the Pentagon, David, that they could have a big voice in whatever follows Mubarak?
Well, they haven't seen it yet, so the fear has yet to materialize. They have not seen the Muslim Brotherhood out in large numbers in these demonstrations, and they have not seen them taking a leadership role in the demonstrations. So as of now, they do not see the Muslim Brotherhood as having a real potential to seize the reins of power.
Chip Reid, what kind of levers can the White House push here? I mean, we're talking about $1.5 billion in aid each year to Egypt. That's not a huge amount of money, even though they're the second largest recipient. What kind of leverage is left?
Not much. It's really kind of moral suasion, the president getting on the phone with Mubarak. But one interesting point is that it's been made clear to me that one thing they do not want is for this to look like some kind of U.S. engineered operation if Mubarak does get forced out and somebody comes in. So you know, they don't have a lot of tools of power here. It's really talking to him, reasoning with him, talking to allies, perhaps cutting back on that aid package. But there really isn't a tremendous amount of power, and in a way that's a good thing because they don't want to make it look like they force things in the end, because we know how much trouble the United States has gotten in the past when they have done that.
Charlie, that's a good point, too. Does it matter to the folks in Egypt, the people in the street? Does it matter what the U.S. government's saying?
Well, I think the people in the streets in Egypt don't want to hear from the U.S., and I don't think it'll matter that much. They have their own grievances. They have high prices for food to worry about. They're trying to put food on the table for their families. They have a lack of jobs, even for the young and the educated. There just isn't enough work there. So they have their own grievances against the Mubarak regime, and these are things the U.S. can't really do anything about, whatever levers of power we might have. whether it's economic aid or whether it's a phone call to Mubarak, you still have a lot of angry people. And if you get 1 million people in the streets, in the squares tomorrow in downtown Cairo, that takes on a life of its own. And no matter what the U.S. would want to do or try to do, I think the people in the Egyptian people are basically now in charge of this, and we have to sit back and do whatever we're going to do quietly.
And just, we touched on this briefly, but strategically, the Israel question here. I mean, Egypt has been a key broker for us in the peace process there. David Martin mentioned Jordan as being the other country, or Charlie as a signatory to the treaty. Is that really the big concern the U.S. has at this point in time? What's going to happen to that whole interrelationship?
It's the primary concern. The peace treaty between Israel and Egypt has been the linchpin of U.S. security policy in the region. It is that peace treaty that has prevented there being any further wars between Israel and the Arab states following the wars in 48, 56, 67, and 73. Very bloody wars. There has not been an interstate war since then. But it goes beyond that. Egypt has been a key ally in the fight against terrorism. It's been helpful to the United States in states like Iraq. It has helped trying to broker reconciliation amongst the Palestinians. So Egypt has been a real ally for American interests in the region over the last 30 some odd years, as Charlie said.
And Charlie, what should we watch for the next 24 to 48 hours here?
I think you have to watch two things. First of all is whether or not the authorities, which comes down now to the Army, allowing the demonstration tomorrow that's been called for of 1 million people, whether it's 1 million or not. There'll be a large number of people in the streets. I think that's the first thing, and then what they actually do. The second thing is to watch what we try and do privately and quietly. There certainly is contact between the governments, between the U.S. and the Egyptian government. I don't know, we haven't heard recently whether President Obama is going to call Mubarak again, whether this is a daily thing, every other day, how much pressure they're going to apply. But frankly, I think the big thing to watch for is tomorrow, the demonstration, and also to see whether the different parts of groups in Egypt can coalesce around whether it's Mohammed el-Baradei or someone else, or whether they signal that they're willing to follow perhaps Vice President Suleiman.
And David, what is your sense? Are we in a critical time frame here, the next 24, 48 hours?
Well, I haven't talked to anybody who thinks that Mubarak is going to survive this, to be able to ride it out. He is, after all, 82 years old, besides all of the protests. And the people I've talked to, and I don't know that I would call this unanimous, doubt that Omar Suleiman is going to be able to run a transition government for very long because he is so close to Mubarak. So, obviously this is all hostage to the dynamic of what happens in the street. But if you try to look at it just in an analytical way, it looks like change is definitely going to come to Egypt.
And Chip, finally, we'll give you the last word here. Will we hear from the president, do we think, soon again on this, or have they played their last card?
I think they're just waiting to see what happens here. The president has nothing on his public schedule today, and I think that's a signal to us and to the world that he is paying very close attention to this and is prepared to do whatever he needs to do depending upon circumstances on the ground over there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hear from him again sometime soon, certainly with this 1 million-person protest looming tomorrow. That certainly could be a time when he comes out and talks again.
All right. Chip Reid at the White House, David Martin at the Pentagon, thanks to both you guys. Charlie Wolfson, thanks for joining us. Robert Danin, thanks again for joining us as well.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching Washington Unplugged. Stay with CBS News for continuing coverage of the ongoing crisis in Egypt. I'm Bob Orr. Have a good day.